Welcome back to the Resolution Room, where we explore how people, organisations and communities handle conflict and change, and what that teaches us about working and living together more effectively. Today's episode looks at something close to home, how Mediation Northern Ireland itself has evolved, the challenges, the turning points, and the future of mediation in a changing world. With me today are two people who represent those two ends of that journey. Rob, our Operations Director, who has been with the organisation for 18 years. He joined when Mediation NI had 14 staff and turnover topped 1 million. And Aaron, our Marketing Executive, who joined just 8 months ago and is helping us bring mediation to new audiences. We're going to talk about what's changed, what's stayed the same, and how mediation skills are becoming essential for managers, teams, and communities alike. So, Rob and Aaron, thank you both for joining me today.
Thank you, Bobby.
Rob, if you want to take us back to when you first joined, what was mediation like back then?
Mediation NI was based here still in Mediation House, and the whole building was filled with staff. As you said, there was 14 staff when I joined back in 2007, and a number of volunteers were involved as well, and associates. As we have now, we had a pool of associate practitioners. So there was a big buzz around the organisation. We were very busy with different programs of work, and also there was lots of funding as well. Community Relations Council core funded the organisation. There were peace programs ongoing and other programs of work that I was involved in, for example, with the funded by the lottery. So there was certainly a lot of activity, and people were very busy, peace building, community work, and other pieces of work that would come in on an ad hoc basis. So there was a real buzz about the place, and I think the connection and reach of the organisation was really broad back then.
Okay. And Aaron, you've obviously just joined the organisation earlier this year. What were your first impressions walking into an organisation with that kind of legacy behind it?
So I didn't know a whole lot about the legacy of Mediation NI when I came here. So I just started back in February. I wasn't aware how long the organisation had been around. I wasn't aware of the extent of the work that had been done over those years as well. So I wasn't overly familiar with that legacy. I remember hearing Laurie, one of our associates, talk about some of the work that had been done in the past. So I grew up in Ardoyne, and every summer there was always a possibility of some sort of conflict or tension. And Laurie had spoken about the work that she had done on Mediation NI to try and calm things down and de-escalate. But I'd never heard of the organisation. So for me to hear that an organisation, a person had come in to do these things and I didn't know about it, I thought was interesting. I think it spoke to how quietly significant the work is, and that a lot of people in those sort of circumstances would claim credit for calming things down or preventing it from de-escalating, whereas our associates, they do the work because it's the good work. They don't do it for credit or for glory, essentially. There was a moment during my second day here. I sat in on the workplace conflict management course that we do, and I do remember thinking just very early on, listening to Laurie facilitate about that, just the experience she brought to everything, the wealth of knowledge. But she was able to talk about sometimes quite like dense and almost boring concepts, but in a way that made them very approachable, very relatable. It wasn't just theory for the sake of it. It was, here's how we put that into practice as well. And there was a moment at some point during that day, I just remember thinking, going, isn't this great? I get to promote this.
And Rob, back in those early days, Mediation NI was thriving on a major post-agreement peace programs. What did the typical week look like back then? Was it mostly community mediation and reconciliation projects?
Yeah, so, I think of the early days for me, which was 2007, but actually the organisation had been in existence for 20 years already by that point. So, the very early days of the organisation I missed. But when I joined, there was, that big network of mediators that was connected to the organisation, and mostly we were involved in sort of pockets and programs of work. So the program I was involved in, for example, was funded by the lottery. It was a 5-year program, and was about working in different areas, 8 in total, to develop a local mediation capacity. and to help connect statutory organisations and community workers and the like, to create new relations, so that if there were ever tensions in the area, that they knew who to speak to, and then they would have a local resource as well to call on. And that was kind of how the organisation was set up. Really, you did have a core of senior management and admin finance support. And then you had these programs of work that were running out in communities, trying to develop different aspects of peace building.
Do you remember any particular project or moment that really summed up the spirit of those years?
Yeah, I think for me, the year after I joined, so in 2008, Mediation NI, in collaboration with the Scottish Mediation Network, co-hosted the European Mediation Conference, and it was held here in Belfast. And it was 10 years after the signing of the Good Friday Agreement. And that brought over 400 delegates, international delegates from the field of mediation and peace building. And it included the likes of the Irish Minister of Foreign Affairs, Dermot Ahern. He was a keynote speaker. John Paul Lederach also was a keynote speaker as well. Held in the waterfront here in Belfast. And really, the energy around mediation as a developing field and the organisation to put on a large-scale conference like that, I think really summed up the energy of those, for me, the early days with M&I.
Yeah, it sounds like it was a very different world back then, sort of busy and optimistic, but also quite demanding.
Absolutely.
Let's talk about what happened as the funding environment began to change. When the big funding streams reduced, Mediation NI obviously had to adapt, becoming leaner, more commercially focused, but still holding on to its social mission. So, Rob, how did the organisation navigate that transition?
Yeah, there were challenges. The financial crisis around 2008, 2010, I think had broad impact across the third sector funding, and so a lot of programs that were coming to an end, unfortunately, didn't have their funding renewed.
Okay.
So there were lots of projects which didn't have their funding renewed, and as a result, key staff, unfortunately, were made redundant as the funding wasn't there to keep them on in post. And that sort of led, I think, the whole sector became a bit of a race to the bottom, in a sense of everyone was chasing the same diminishing pots of money. And so the impact for Mediation NI was that the organisation started to shrink. A program of work would come to an end, 2 or 3 staff that were attached to that program would be let go, and then the organisation went from 14 members of staff over the years down to at one point just 2 members of staff. So that obviously had significant challenges in terms of our reach, our connection, and our ability to deliver services. And what we did as an organisation is we started to change our focus from funding streams and looking at other ways that we could generate income. And we're fortunate as a charity in that we have a service that we can deliver, and there is a demand out there for that service. Mediation training, conflict resolution related training courses, and mediations themselves. And so we started to broaden our reach in terms of the commercial sector and see what other ways that we could use our skills and training and that kind of range of services that we had as a way of generating income for the organisation and still doing what the organisation was set up to do, which is help people in conflict.
Yeah. And Aaron, from your side, you've been helping shape how we talk about that, positioning mediation not just as conflict resolution, but as personal and professional development. What's been your approach to that?
I suppose at the heart of it, I want the work to feel recognisable. I'm by no means an expert on mediation or conflict resolution, but I do feel like I've learned a lot in a very short space of time. So people, we deal with conflict every single day in our conversations, whether that's like deadlines, feedback, relationships, right down to, it's not my turn to take out the nappy bin, it's yours, right up to something far more serious. The challenge is to show that mediation gives people options. It gives them language and structure for handling those moments. So, in short, really, conflict isn't almost inevitable. How we handle that is entirely up to ourselves, but those things can be learned. So I've made that deliberately focused on connecting what we teach in our courses, and connecting that to real experiences. So be that through like team pressure, in burnout, difficult meetings, whatever that may. I think once people see that link between themselves and a piece of theory, then it just they're much more interested, they're much more likely to engage, work with it, respond. Like I don't know about you, but how often there's so many times you're on Instagram or something and you see a reel, and it's just about something that you've spoken about, but immediately you go, God, I feel called out here.
Yeah.
And you can relate to it straight away. Big part of getting to that point for me, it's tone is probably the most important thing, keeping everything very human and steady. We talk about skills that help people listen well and manage conflict effectively and de-escalate tensions, but that is a skill that has to be learned. It's not just something that we can do. The stories that we tell through our social media, through all our marketing efforts, I think that gives people a sense of what that actually looks like in action, and that there's a human side to everything that we do, and that's where the message lands.
Okay, yeah, I mean, I agree. Modern workplaces face pressures that our founders couldn't have imagined.
Yeah.
They're dealing with hybrid teams, burnout, constant change. Our training now reaches everyone from senior leaders down to frontline staff. Rob, have you seen workplace conflict evolve over the years in any particular ways?
Yeah, I definitely think there is a much greater appetite now for the likes of mediation and alternative dispute resolution mechanisms within workplaces. So I think what traditionally would have been just sent down the grievance process, increasingly will bring in mediators to help resolve conflicts in workplaces. And, I think we're getting called in earlier and earlier as well into organizations. So rather than waiting for the outcome of the grievance process and saying, okay, the recommendation is that you should have a mediation, organizations are realizing, well, let's try mediation first. And maybe, if we can reach a resolution early, the grievance process actually won't be necessary at all. So it's really becoming much more proactive, I think, in workplaces on how they're responding to conflict. I think that's only good for workplaces themselves. Employers are reaching quicker resolutions, but mostly the employees who are, getting much faster response to conflicts that they're experiencing in their workplace.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of organizations are seeing that over the last 10, 15 years, managers that are being promoted from within the ranks don't necessarily have managerial skills. Now they're dealing with the effects of that, and a lot of our courses do provide those skills, albeit mediation and conflict resolution, but they're skills that are transferable into everyday work that they're doing. And Aaron, you're behind our new digital campaigns, podcasts and content and the like, trying to make mediation accessible and engaging. How do you get people to care about a topic that most only think about whenever things go wrong?
So I've kind of touched on this about it. It really does boil down to making it relatable, but that's by plain simple language. You're not getting caught up with jargon that's going to alienate people. I think a lot of people we don't realize, and I'm guilty of this as much as anybody, that we are engaged in conflict every day. We just call it something else. I'm stressed at work, or my boss isn't communicating properly with me, or that feedback wasn't great. There's a conflict to that. I think when we think of conflict, we think of it as it has to be some sort of like a blow up, as opposed to like little micro moments that it can also count towards that. I think another key, so I touched on tone, another key is probably timing as well. So making people aware, businesses, leaders aware, that bringing mediation into discussions before a conflict erupts. So you touched on that about being more proactive. Mediation skills are, I think they're essential for anybody in some sort of like leadership role, anybody that cares about employee well-being, or even just wants to create a culture like some sort of organizational culture that thrives rather than waiting for that crisis moment. It does change your mindset. It does require a change of mindset from problem solving to skill building. So it's not as tangible as a full blown crisis, which makes it a bit more difficult. It's sort of selling the benefits of that to people, but it's an important one. I lean quite heavily, more so now, on visuals and voices. So we want to use real people in all of our content. So that's where something like the podcast is so good to do. But also, we were able to get a wealth of knowledge and experience from that. But also people who've taken our courses, who can actually tell us what they got from it. Because I think that shows that there's an emotion behind the work too. And like I said, really, once people sort of see that link, they tend to stay interested. And if it's something they deem to be useful to them, then we can work on building that relationship with them.
Yeah, it's interesting, when you talk about leadership development and communication, or even mental well-being, the mediation skills sit right underneath all of that. We've seen managers come to our training thinking that they're learning to handle conflict at work, and then they're leave saying that it's changed how they communicate at home and with friends. That's the kind of transferable impact that really defines the work that we're doing now. So if that's where we are today, a smaller, smarter, more adaptive organisation, where do we go to next? So looking ahead, we're talking a lot internally about innovation, digital learning, AI-enabled tools, and expanding across different sectors. So Rob, from your perspective, what's the next big challenge for mediation as a field?
I think it's been a challenge for many years, and it continues to be a challenge, even though we see a greater uptake in the use of mediation and ADR in workplaces. I think proving the value of mediation is still one of the major challenges that the field has in greater adoption. It's if someone picks up the phone and they hear that a mediation is going to cost them a couple of thousand. They might balk at that cost initially, but actually the cost of not doing anything is far greater. But the problem is those costs are generally hidden in workplaces.
Yeah.
So, if an unresolved conflict will often lead to a situation where someone might be fired and then rehired, and the training that goes into that, or, people go off absenteeism with, stress and the like due to unresolved conflict. Or indeed, if they end up at a tribunal, the average payout of a tribunal, I think, is about 13,000 now. So the cost of not doing anything is actually quite significant, but they're hidden costs, and so workplaces don't see those quite so readily. But I do think that's our challenge, is helping people understand that actually this needs to be an embedded part of your your day-to-day workplace way of being. Helping people resolve conflict, manage conflict, deal with conflict more effectively is really key, because, as Aaron said, it is very natural. It happens every day in every interaction. There can often be some element of conflict, and so I think it's our role is to help people understand better ways of that we can work together.
And Aaron, you've come in with a strong sense of how branding and storytelling can modernise mediation.
Yep.
What do you think will define the next phase for organisations like ours?
I think that the focus, well, in my role at the very least, the focus ahead is on its reach and relevance. So that means making mediation more accessible wherever people are through formats that suit them. I have conversations with people when they ask, what do you do? And I explain to them, and I explain who I work for, and they're either not familiar with mediation or they're not familiar with the organisation. So I suppose I want people to at least get a better understanding of what mediation is as a field. I would like to sort of see continued development of the digital side of learning. We have online courses to go with our in-person ones so that anywhere in the world can access them, but also flexible tools that people can use interchangeably, essentially, or alongside live training. The key thing with all that, though, is keeping that human element central. So I talked about, we keep using real stories, authentic voices, lived experiences, using all those things to remind people why mediation actually matters. A big thing for me personally, in terms of like where I want to see mediation go itself or the organisation, is greater youth involvement. Obviously, it's brilliant to go into workplaces and talk to managers and staff and get them trained up. But I think with anything that's being taught, the younger the group of people that are learning about it, I think the greater the long-term benefits, essentially. Greater possibility for cultural change. I know that might sound a wee bit fanciful, but if we can teach young people, or better equip them even, to learn how to listen, manage conflicts, navigate all that, navigate difficult conversations, that could make lasting cultural change, I think. And just to elaborate on something else you said, when mediation, I do think, should sit within a team's culture. So those skills can influence how colleagues interact with each other, how someone at the top makes decisions, aware of what's going to happen below them. And when organizations build mediation into like everyday, proactive, start it again. And when organizations build mediation into everyday practice, then that organization naturally becomes more resilient, it's more collaborative, and most importantly, it's more self-aware.
Yeah.
Is that go ahead, Rob?
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right, Aaron, in that teaching people these skills from a young age these are core life skills, and helping people handle conflicts is not something that we can just assume that you just pick up at some point in your life. I think teaching people in schools or giving them exposure to what it looks like to have a conflict managed well, really equips people for the rest of their life.
Yeah.
So many people come into our training, I think, and that just have their eyes open. They spent many years in workplaces, not realizing this toolkit was available to them, and I think it completely changes the way people are in their own personal lives, in their workplace, in their relationships. And I think I remember a colleague once said that they thought that mediation or how to handle conflict should be part of everyone's induction process in a workplace setting. Mm-hmm. And I couldn't agree more. I think we learn the health and safety rules, what happens if the fire alarm goes off, all things which probably will happen at some point in their employment. But for some reason, we don't teach them what to do when you have a difficult conversation or when you're in a conflict with a colleague. And I think, you could really reduce workplace conflict significantly by just giving people a half day, a 1 day introduction to those kind of managing conflict skills from an early stage in every job. Could have a significant impact, I think, on workplace conflict.
Yeah, I mean, what excites me is seeing mediation shift from something reactive, brought in when things go wrong, to something strategic, proactive, and leadership driven. The more managers and teams who train with us, the fewer formal disputes are going to arise later on. It's cost effective, like you said, Rob, for organisations, but more importantly, it builds healthier, stronger working cultures.
100%.
Yeah. Unfortunately, that's all we've got time for this week on this episode. As we wrap up, I want to leave listeners with a thought. Conflict isn't a sign of failure, it's a sign of human connection that needs attention. The work we do, whether through mediation or training, is really about giving people the tools to face those moments with confidence rather than fear. Rob and Aaron, thank you both for being here and for sharing your perspectives from opposite ends of the M&I timeline.
Thank you.
It's been fascinating hearing how much has changed and how much of the heart of the mediation remains the same. To our listeners, you can find out more about our courses, workplace mediation and community projects at mediationni.org, or get in touch if you'd like to bring training to your team. I'm Bobby Marno, and this has been The Resolution Room. Thanks for listening, and remember, dialogue changes everything.